Welcome back to Life's Chillin'. My name is Avital, and this week's Parshat is Parshat Noah, which is filled with so many wonderful stories. What I want to start with today is actually the last line of Bereshit. So that was last week's Torah portion, last week's Parsha. And the last line of that Parsha says essentially that God has decided he's going to destroy the world because man has become corrupt and God regretted that he made the world. And so he decided that he was just going to wipe everything out, start from scratch. But, as the last line says, Noah found grace in the eyes of God. So, God had, again, all these intentions of destroying the world, but somebody, Noah, stood out to him. And then this week's Parshat Noah, begins with the Torah telling us that Noah was a righteous person, and that he was considered to be perfect in his generations, and that Noah walked with God. And so both Parsha Bereshit ends with Noah, and Parshat Noah begins with him and his righteousness. So God tells Noah that he has decided he's going to destroy the world with a flood, but that Noah and his wife, his sons, and his daughter-in-laws have merited to be saved. So whatever their deeds were, whatever their righteousness was, and the commentators have lots of different ideas about what it was that Noah did or didn't do that led him to merit to be saved, him and his family were different enough from the people of that generation who were corrupt that they merited to be saved by God. And that's quite an impressive feat. Quite an impressive feat to be the sole family unit that is different in the entire world. So when I was thinking about that, when I was thinking about what it must be like to be that sole family unit, to be part of Noah's family, I was thinking it must have been so lonely. And then I was reminded of this idea also from Parsha Bereshit, from last week's Parsha, which says it's not good for man to be alone. And in the context of that line, it's not good for man to be alone, was in reference to when God created Eve, the first woman. Because God had created man, Adam, and had seen that it wasn't a good thing for Adam to be alone, the only one of his species. And so God created Eve, and then he was alone no more. And so when we look at that, it's a little bit hard to reconcile the idea of man not being alone with one Parsha later, Noah and his family seeming to be sort of alone or in isolation on this ark in the whole world, because at the end of the flood, when the waters subside and they're able to go back on the earth, it's just them. And they get to have the opportunity, I suppose, to rebuild and restart the entire world and to grow the population. So it's an amazing opportunity, but it's also quite a weight to carry. And similarly to that, actually, at the end of the Parsha, we meet Abraham and Sarah. At that time, their names were Abram and Sarai, but Abraham is credited as being the first monotheist, and he is the first Jewish person. And again, we see somebody who his ideas are completely different from everybody in the entire world. Abraham is saying, no, there's just one God. It's not the sun and the moon and the stars and all of these different deities. It's just one God. And not just that it's one God, but, he identifies the specific God who is the creator of the universe. And so we see both Noah and Abraham in their, respective family units as being alone, not in their physical presence necessarily, but in their beliefs. They were the only ones to be, Noah was the only one in his family to be righteous enough to be saved, and Abraham and, Sarah were the only ones to believe that, hey, there's just one God. So, an interesting place. But again, how can we reconcile that line of it's not good for man to be alone with these people who are kind of alone in their beliefs? So, while from an outside perspective, while from a perspective like I had, they might appear to be alone. They might not appear to have a lot of friends or, neighbors or people they can, relate to. They did have their family group. It wasn't Noah as a singular man on the ark. It wasn't Abraham just himself in the world. Noah had his wife, his sons, and his daughter-in-laws who shared in his beliefs and who were working also towards a mission that he was working towards. And so while it wasn't a large group, he had a core quality group. And the same thing for Abraham. While eventually Abraham grew to have many followers, at the beginning it was just him and his partnership with his wife. And so while he may not have had, again, a big group, he had somebody. He wasn't alone. Since the creation of Eve, man has never been alone. And while it is not easy to be different, while it's not easy to stand apart from the rest, to have different beliefs, and not just to have those beliefs, but to be public about thinking a different way, we can see from Noah and from Abraham that to be different is actually a good thing. We see, I would say, something that continues to support that idea is in Parshat Noah we have the story of the Tower of Babel, in which it says that all of the world was of one language and one purpose. And these people decided that they were going to build a tower to heaven. And in God's response to that is to create the languages of the world, which there are believed to have been 70 originally, and to spread out the people, to disperse them over the entire earth, rather than to have them in a close proximity to one another. And so we could see from that them actually having the one language and the one purpose wasn't a good thing, for everybody to conform and nobody to question what people are doing and to say, why are we doing this? Is it the right thing to do? That's not actually viewed as a good thing. And so in contrast to that, Noah and Abraham thinking for themselves is a great thing. So I would say that there are two main takeaways that I saw in this Parsha. First is, again, think for yourself. Don't be afraid to be different. We all want so badly to be liked, to be just like everybody else, not to feel different, not to feel weird. But as we can again see in this Parsha through these examples of our, sort of our forefathers and these great biblical characters, to think for ourselves, to be different is something to be celebrated, something that merited for Noah to say that he walked with God, such a high level. And the second is that we are never alone. We are so fortunate, in this day and age. While Noah and Abraham were close to the creation of the universe, and Abraham could be the first monotheist, and his ideas were so original and there was nobody like him in the world, for the most part, with very few exceptions nowadays, there's going to be somebody who thinks just like we do. It may not be in our friend group, it may not be in our family, or even in our community, but we can talk to people all around the world. We are so fortunate. And somewhere out there's going to be a group of people who thinks just the way you do, who's going through the exact same things you are, who feels what you feel. And so we can use these modern modes of communication to try and reach people all around the world in order to form that community for ourselves, because as the Torah said, it's not good for man to be alone. And so I hope that you can take something meaningful and impactful for your life out of this week's Parsha. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a great week ahead.